And we are finally back to Legal and Leadership Live. Sorry about our couple of minute delay. Thank you for joining us online. We're streaming on Zoom. We're streaming on LinkedIn Live. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're all over the place. My name's Steve Lois, my co-host.
James Reed, happy to be here.
And we've got a third one. So I don't know if this is now the Three Musketeers today or what.
I love it.
But thanks for joining us, Eric.
Yeah, Eric Tarigian. Thanks for having me.
So I think everybody knows James and I already. So before we jump into today's topic, why don't you give a little bit of a background on you and why you're sitting here with us today?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm at the arc here of a 30-year career in transformational HR. And I've had the chance to do, I always like to say, I do the work that no one else wants to do, and then I get the experience that no one else is getting.
Sure.
So I've gone in and done distressed assets, and I've done shutdowns and plant closures and union relations. And like I thought well, my nephew asked me one time, he goes, does it ever get contentious? And I said, well, if it's not contentious, they're not talking to HR, right? So I've done all that kind of work. Now I've got to the point where how do I add value by bringing all of these transformational skills to a broader audience? So I'm really trying to get out, help people see a different way of looking at HR. Stop being the compliance police, stop being the no department, and start getting into real, true strategic people leadership. And leverage your selling skills and sell HR. Problem identification is what we had a long talk about it.
Yeah.
It's problem identification and then bring solutions to your customers.
Well, we're glad to have you. So I'm sure you're going to be able to use that 30 years of experience in today's conversation. So if you're joining us for the first time, the whole point of what we do here is to talk about some of the real issues that affect HR from a leadership perspective, a legal perspective, a general HR perspective. Sometimes we get comments and questions from the audience. Sometimes we don't.
Great.
We just kind of run with it, and it's okay. If you're watching, feel free to text either James or I. My cell, 734-837-8500. James, as always.
734-649, lucky 1313.
1313. So you got that. So if you have a question or if you've got a comment, text one of us. It's easier because we're on so many different platforms. It's hard to keep up with everything. So when we put this out there, we started the conversation around the future of work. And when I logged in online this morning, I just put in the future of work, there's like billions of articles and comments, and I think a lot of it is good and a lot of it is just more noise of the same crap. So I'm hoping in today's conversation we don't talk about the same crap, and if we need to, we talk about it in a more practical way where people can actually take what our thoughts are and do something with it.
That's the greatest. I think you give people actionable stuff and it stops to become philosophy.
Without question. So we've already talked about remote work. We've talked about this, and all of that's going to come into play. But let me just kind of throw this out there because it was some of the questions that came through. What does the future of work look like based on what we now know, and what do we do about it?
So, the first thought is, how far in the future? Are we doing 10 years, 5 years? It all varies, but
I think you got to take your liberty in whatever you want to address, James.
So my prediction is that the gig work will continue to increase. So a SHRM study said up to 50% by 2030 will be working a gig on the side and other opportunities. You even mentioned today, we're talking offline about all these people doing this side hustle for a great client and customer. So that'll continue. I think sexual harassment and sexual relations are going to be an all-time high. Going to continue to go up. I really think so because during COVID, it was an all-time high. And I think as we start to have more purpose and more being that whole human in the workplace, I think you're going to have that attraction and you're going to talk about stuff outside of work. And I think there's going to be more relationships than ever before. And I think along those lines, as HR, you're not going to just be dealing with problems. You're going to actually have to train and coach and help people be better managers and be better leaders and be more on the positive side, not just the negative police. I think artificial intelligence is going to be a huge deal, but we're not going to replace HR in any way, just replace certain tasks and technology. And I think that, we need to make sure that we're not blocking the internet. I think that people are complaining. I see them in the bathroom or turning off their phone and use data, calling friends. We are using our network, our relationships, I think, are more important than ever. And too many companies still block that resource for employees.
That's a great point.
I didn't even realize that people were blocking that. We don't block anything. I'll take that back. I'll take that back.
You will now.
If it has a XXX, it is blocked. You cannot do certain work. But beyond that, is that really an issue?
It's a huge issue.
Are you experiencing that?
Huge issue. I actually have a customer who I email with, a potential client, who can't receive my emails because his email server filters them out because my domain's only 6 months old.
Oh my gosh.
So there's a very draconian view of IT right now because everyone's afraid of cybersecurity. So I think as the CIOs, the CISOs start to figure this out, they'll loosen up a bit, but we're in uncharted territory and things are on lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
I like to add one perspective to what James was talking about because I like to look at the fact that the relationship between the employee and the employer has shifted. I think this shift started a decade ago, and COVID really brought it to reality, and it forced our hand. And when you think about how we normally do IT projects, like sending everybody home, we would do studies and test market and sample things in small groups. But in March of 2020, we literally packed everyone up in a week and sent them home, the whole world. And it forced us to say, hey, this works. People can work remotely. People can work from home. This new modality happened. And now people are saying, well, wait a minute. I can go have lunch with my wife, or I can walk downstairs and see my kids. Work now has to integrate into my life. It's no longer about balancing my life.
So we use the term work-life blend, not balance. But I'm going to say one thing to that I would love to get both of your opinions on. You and I talked about this a little bit. I don't think work at home is for everybody.
I agree.
I think there's certain profiles of people, and we've even experienced it in our organization, that tend to struggle with it more, whether it's an organizational thing, whether it's, and I think in a few instances, it's just they're getting so tired of being alone that they need to be in the office sometimes. And we're never going to mandate it, but we're sure encouraging it with a few people. What are your thoughts?
This is hit me in the face about a year ago. I was trying to recruit someone to join my team as a recruiter, and she was amazing. And I was doing everything I could to get her to join the team. And one of our big benefits was, when you looked at our value proposition, we're 100% remote. You work where you have to work when you have to work. We're global. I don't care when you work in the day. And for her, that loss of structure in her life, she couldn't deal with. It wasn't until I offered her an office to come to, I landed her, which is so opposite of what you think's happening right now in the world, right? And to a lot of other people, you offer them an office, you won't get them. So I think what it has to happen is we have to really stop saying this is a hard, fast rule. And we have to start looking now and saying this is the framework for what the workplace is going to look like. Once we set up the framework, now we have to have adaptability.
Okay, so what about the legal aspects
On the legal
of it?
side, I'm getting a lot of doctors' notes saying, I need an accommodation, give me office space at work. I'm depressed, I'm lonely, I need to be interacting with people, and we have to accommodate and engage in the interactive process. And I agree that initially it was a family vacation working at home to an extent. You're hanging out with your kids and your spouse. Now a lot of other kids are back in school or in their camps, and now your spouse may be back in work. It's lonely. So I think we have to worry about I'm seeing more alcoholism, where people are drinking at home, doing drugs. Too many people have their camera off remote. And I think that the hybrid solution probably is better, because even if someone's amazing at remote work, if I never see them, my relationship may be stronger with the person I see all the time.
Are there any legal implications of, if I let Eric work from home and I don't let you work from home, but you're in the same job, what about the legal
It
implications?
starts to get tricky.
So the legal implications are, there's the unconscious bias allegation, where if you factored in something illegal, there's legal issues. But if you factored in nothing illegal, and back to your point, we've always focused on performance. If you keep it based a perk, if your performance meets certain metrics that we'll revisit, I think that's the best way to do it.
But what about if it's the well-being conversation? I'm gonna switch it a little bit, because everybody's talking now about well-being, which I think is important. What if I can see it in Eric's face that the well-being is not there because he's at home all the time? I want Eric to come in, but I know you're good with it, your well-being. Is there any legal issue there?
I think that on its face, no.
Okay.
But I think it's kind of like when you do a reduction in force. You do this analysis to see, does it disproportionately impact a certain race or sex or religion? So I think you have to holistically look at it. So it's a two-part test. One is look at how I want to handle this employee, and take one step back. What's the perception of taking this route with everybody else and factored in, but it's not illegal as long as you have a legal reason of making that decision.
And then if we can, there's the could and the should. James, I always talk about this. He'll tell you what you can do. I'm going to tell you, think differently now about what should you do.
Sure.
It's very hard to project into someone what they're feeling. So you got to be really careful. That's a trap.
You're making an
sometimes.
assumption.
And I've seen a boss. I saw a CEO one time who said, "Hey, this person is struggling. This person is really having a hard time." And I'm like, "Well, Greg, you don't know that. You're thinking that." Like, and it's very hard to try to jump into their head. And then if you do try to get into their head and ask the questions, now they get guarded or they get sensitive or different things come to light. You got to be really careful. That's a very slippery slope.
So let's keep on this one for a second because it's such a this remote thing is such a big deal, and the trend is we're going to go to this hybrid. Everybody seems to be in agreement that there's going to be some hybrid, but let's talk about why it happened and what's happening now. Let's put it into today. It happened because COVID, like you were saying, Eric, shut us down. We had to send everybody home. You said it within a week. We did it in 24 hours. On Thursday, we said, Friday, you're home, guys. It's as simple as that.
Yep.
And it was done by the pandemic. It's an employer-driven market. But let's think about what's happening right now. And I'm curious of your opinion. And if you're watching this, you're thinking this already. Inflation's through the roof right now. You can't, there's no downside. Mortgage rates are going up. The economy is changing. Layoffs have happened more in the last 3 months than they have in the previous 3 years. So the pendulum is starting to go back from an employee-driven to an employer-driven. How do you think that's going to impact this issue of remote work when you got JP Morgan's, Tesla's, and a whole bunch of other companies that said, guess what? You don't come back in, you're out of here. What do you think that's going to do to this issue and this trend?
Well, one of the things that I'm seeing is the job market's not slowing down. And I'm sure you guys are seeing the same thing, but there's still top grading. There's still people leaving for better opportunities, different opportunities that suit their style better. So I think we're going to go into a recession now, but we're going to go into it with a hot job market. So it's going to be something unseen and untested. Every other time we've had this, and I went through it this morning with a potential client we were talking about, and he went all the way back to 1970. And so every couple of years we've had this kind of cyclical feel, and all of a sudden you get economic pressure, there's political pressure, inflation starts to click up, but every single time we saw the job market tank well ahead of it. Now, while we're seeing layoffs and we're starting to see them in big tech, which we never saw before, we're still seeing placements are flying off the shelf. People are getting jobs every day, and that, I think, is going to change how we have to react as a company.
So this is my perspective on this, James, and I'd love yours. Yeah. I think the pent-up demand is there. I believe when the pent-up demand goes away, we're going to be in a different situation. I don't think it's going to be anywhere near what it was in 2008, but I think where it was always a leading indicator, Eric, I think right now, this is the industry that we're in too, I think it's a lagging indicator because of pent-up demand sometime mid-next year, and we're already seeing a softening of organizations, big organizations, even beyond tech, saying, well, we're not going to add these additions, we're just going to replace the ones that we've lost. So I think it's going to be a little bit different. What's your thought?
Yeah, I know for a fact that I'm doing the most layoffs I've ever done since 2008 in the past month. And
really?
Yes, and many companies, all of them, are saying, James, should I shut down my entire North America or just certain employees?
Crap.
Should I do this reduction in force? And they're starting to do that analysis of perception of how does it look with various protected classes and what are the reasons. So there is some planning going on, even though they may not execute for several months down the road. So I think that is real. And I think to your point about the remote work, the relationships go both ways. And if I hire somebody that starts out remote and doesn't have a great relationship with me and they're getting top dollar and their skill set is not necessarily any better than who's on site, the first to come might be the first to go. And I think that employers, especially now, I want to get your take on this too, Steve, the loyalty of having a 30-year employee is gone. Sherm said the average is 4 years is great. If you can get 4.3 years out of your employee, you beat the average. So I think we're starting to realize it's both ways. If I don't feel the relationship, it's not just a forever marriage anymore.
Yeah, I think that's one of the trends that actually isn't talked about enough, right? And Eric, from your senior HR background, I'm curious, we'll throw this in here too, but I think that there's such a disdain by some employers on what's gone on by no fault of the employee, with COVID and remote and all this other stuff. But it seems like many of the employers, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, this is my perspective since James asked it, are saying, well, wait a minute, they've taken advantages of us for so long. We're actually glad there's going to be a little bit of a hit because they won't be able to take advantage of us anymore, and we can pull back some of those perceived benefits and so on. So I do think that pendulum, unfortunately, just like in 2008 and 2000 and in 1995, I've gone through 3 of them, right? I think the pendulum's going to shift back the other way.
The one thing that I'm seeing different is today's workforce they were children in 2008. So in 2008, they watched companies cut their moms and dads without any, so 30 years, you've been here 25 years, I'm sorry, you're going home.
Yeah.
They have a different relationship with the employer now. They don't have this view of, I'm going to come here for 30 years. I remember when I got hired by Ford in 1989, my grandma said, that's great, you'll never leave Ford. But that was the mindset, right? You go and you get this job and you're there for 30, 40 years and you built and you grew and you learned this one system and this one structure. But now we get to what James talked about, this gig economy. But I think now people are starting to see themselves as independent contractors. I'm an independent provider of HR services. Ford might be my one and best customer, but I'm a provider. So if someone else comes along, if Pepsi comes along and it's got a better gig and it fits my needs better, I'm going to shift. And they're not thinking about the fact that, hey, they invested in me, I invested in them, I'm going to stay. There's going to be some loyalty. I think all that is gone.
I think that went out the door probably 2012, right after the 2008
And that's
thing.
what I meant by this has been shifting for a decade, but people all want to blame it on COVID, and I think that's short-sighted. This is not because of COVID. COVID accelerated it.
How many times have we said
Right.
COVID to me was the great exaggerator?
Exactly.
I don't think
That's right.
it created some problems, but I think it accentuated or accelerated, Eric, to your point, more problems than it created, in my opinion, from an HR perspective.
And it made them real. We said for years, and I was one of the same people who said this, you can't work from home, you can't work from home, you can't work from home. We just couldn't see the reality of it. But then we had no choice. Now you can't say that anymore.
Although the legal issues are going to continue to increase dramatically. So I have an all-time high, not only backlog, but the new environment is increasing the legal issues. So let me explain. One, if an employee is disgruntled, they'll just refuse to ever come into the office again and say, I need to work remote, accommodate me, I'm depressed or stressed out.
Oh, no.
And then they just ghost you, and it's very hard to evaluate their performance, their engagement, their other things. They're daring you to terminate them.
Oh, man.
And even though the EEOC guidance is you can still require remote work for many great reasons, and that's presumed to be in person, a lot of plaintiff attorneys are saying, well, all of that case law and precedent was pre-COVID. Now the EEOC may say COVID remote for life. And so there's a lot more lawsuits that way. There's a lot more lawsuits involving protected classes of white males. Any white male that's ever let go says it must be because the company's looking for more diversity instead of taking
So now you got lawsuits going in the opposite
It's going
way.
the opposite,
Oh,
all-time
jeez.
high. I've never seen anything like this. And I think that employees are more comfortable than ever speaking up.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right? And I think every employee, when they eventually have a stressful situation, I still think that it's very rare for them to take accountability. They blame leadership.
Oh yeah, that's human nature. It's always going to happen. Let me give you another unique twist to this. We were recruiting underwriters, and we were hiring heavy. So we were hiring everybody who could pass a certain level. We found a group in Texas where they had 3 people interviewing, and then the person who was presenting for the job was not the person who interviewed.
Really?
And it took us a couple cycles to realize this, but they were professional interviewers. They would show up, take the test, do the interview. They would give all the credentials of the person who was ultimately going to show up. The person who reported to work on the first day was not that same person.
I think you pointed out a trend that we miss, right? You said employees are more comfortable speaking up now than ever before. Eric, I think you said something like that before as well. I have experienced that myself. And I think if we think about the trends that are resulting from this and the lack of leadership and so on, leaders need to be willing to embrace that, not be offended by that. I'm going to give you a personal example. From 9 to 10 this morning, I talked to a former employee of mine who was let go last week. Wasn't the best circumstances on how she was let go and all of that. But she was willing to take the time to give it to me from her context without it, again, her context and our context may be a little different. That's not the point. The point is in years gone by, I would have just kind of blew it off. They're a disgruntled employee because we let them go.
Right.
But she didn't have to share her context with me. I think as leaders, one of the things we have to do because of this exact thing, James, is be open to the criticism that we're hearing more of and not take it as they're just bashing me. Now, there's those that want to cancel you. We all know that. That's a cultural thing that's happening right now. But if they're truly doing it to share with you what's going on, we have to be willing to accept it. Would you agree?
Oh my God, absolutely. And this data has always been there. We've just always struggled with how to use it. It's a very valid data point. And I don't know, this might be a big stretch, but I go back to Target Zero. And I don't know if you guys ever remember reading that book. It was Deming and Toyota Quality System.
Oh, yeah.
But Target Zero, one of the big concepts was no one knows the production job better than the person doing the job. Well, no one knows what the employee's relationship is with your company better than someone who lived it.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you listen to that? Now, you might listen to it and say, sorry, that was completely irrelevant and dismiss it. But at least you're now being a leader, looking at data reasonably. You're not just dismissing hearing it. And I think for a long time we dismissed hearing it. So that now that we're open to hearing it, Glassdoor, all these open cultures, all this climate, you're going to see employees' willingness to speak up going up. But then that's going to create more tension, and we're going to get more need for James because we're going to start now having so-and-so said this, and it was on their mind, and it offended me.
I think along those lines, I'm also seeing bad management in good faith. So what I mean by that is people feel you have to have pillow gloves with your employees. And so a lot of these managers are afraid to have any conflict. And when they have an issue, instead of using tools to address it, they kind of just start finding who's less confrontational, easier to work with. And then when those employees leave or quit, they don't really understand the breakdown in the relationship. And that manager's not reporting it to HR or other people to solve it.
See, I don't think what the team members are looking for is a leader just to coddle them. I don't.
Never.
I think we're doing that because we don't know any better.
Yep.
I use this thing called kindness and candor. Right? We have to care for our employees. We have to be kind to our employees. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if you can't be directly honest for the purposes of helping the other person get better, I think you're doing that person a disservice, to your point. Right. Instead of the kid gloves, the coddling and all that, I don't think that's truly what. If you're watching this and you're on the opposite side and you're saying, well, I do want that, I'd love to hear your comments. Text me, 734-837-8500. If you want to come on a show and talk about that, I'd love to hear it, but I don't think most people want it. I think they want clarity, honesty in the right way in order to help them improve.
And I completely agree, but I don't think it's necessarily the managers don't know better. I think they got promoted to manager because they're good at a certain skill set or longevity. And I think the future of work, we need to revisit, do you really want to manage people when you've never managed people?
And this is a classic argument, conversation we've been having for years. I believe the hardest job in every organization and the most important one is frontline leaders. Because what do you ask a frontline leader to do? I want you to do more this period with less, and don't piss anybody off.
And you're still responsible for all the work.
Okay, so then we take these people, and they're good doers, and we put them into these leadership roles, and we don't do 1 minute of training for them.
Yeah.
We don't do any development. We don't teach them what it means to be a leader. Being a leader has always been hard. Now it is 10x hard, what it used to be. We've got to start giving skills to this frontline leadership, because the better job the frontline leader does, the more engaged your next level is, the easier it is for this organization to move forward.
So since you both brought it up, so this morning when I did my future of work and all that, whether it was McKinsey or Deloitte or doesn't matter, they had their top 10, top 6, top 7, whatever it might be, and every one of them had upskilling their staff, and then somewhere in the byline it talked about upskilling leaders. But none of them, not one that I read this morning at least, said, what does that mean? So I'm curious. So if we're talking about the future of work and trends and saying, okay, we need to upskill our leaders, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think you got to start with the number one skill you can give anybody is time management. And that being able to manage their days, prioritize their time. They have a lot on their plate. And this is every front leader I've ever seen. There's a lot on their plate. Help them start to separate the wheat from the chaff and then prioritize and sequence what's left over. Then you have to get to critical conversations, and it's what you said, honesty and candor, right? But that critical conversation, how do you engage someone and sit them down and say, this is how you're reflecting? And I love the way Heather Lynch says it. It's, the jar doesn't know what its label says. So if you're a bottle in the fridge, you don't know what your label is. But most people don't. So if you can help people understand how they're presenting, that's a great skill as a leader. Then you have to do the classic 3 steps. Identify what you're asking them to do and how do they fit into the bigger picture. Give them the tools they need, and then give them feedback and get out of their way. And people will accept that. Then the person who just won't do it will fail. It's a very easy conversation to have, right? Here's what you needed to do. Here was the stuff I gave you to do it. Here's where I gave you feedback to adjust. You're still not able to do it. That's a very easy discussion. The person who is struggling, wants to do well, but can't, in that iterative loop, you're going to have the ability to refocus them, change them, and grow them. And isn't that our job, right? Grow people, make them better. And then the person who's really good is going to pick this up. They're going to know how they fit into the bigger picture. They're going to be aggressive, and they're going to go move forward.
What do you think? A lot of employees historically were pigeonholed in their position, and I think I've even seen lawsuits where the employee goes, my employer didn't give me my career path. So I think when you're upskilling, you have to show them this job position is not to have you stuck here. I expect constant improvement and new skills and upskilling, and every month we're going to revisit this. Do you have the tools and the training and what you need to achieve this improvement and these goals and this vision going forward? And I think it has to be, there's a legal element, there's a leadership element, there's the actual trade or whatever their specialty element is. And I believe in continuing education. You said you learn something new, every week. So do I. Yeah. I think that when you're interacting with your employee, if they're not learning something new, we're doing something wrong.
And Steve and I, during the sound check, had a great discussion. You have to make it relevant to that person. Because if I tell you career development for me might mean I want to be a senior version of what I am, and that's my goal, and this is my time horizon arc. Another person might say, I want to be the COO, or I want to go be a CEO of my own company. And I think all of that has to be okay. I remember I had a HR person working for me. She was an HR generalist, and she was high on our list, and we were developing her, and she got a great opportunity with a much bigger organization, and she was afraid to call me and tell me, well, I'm going to be leaving your team. And I was celebrating it with her, and she was shocked. So, well, I'm going to celebrate your growth. I'd like it to be on my team, but if it's not, I'm still going to celebrate your growth because you're important. And I think if you have that spirit as a leader, people feel it, they get it, it's authentic. That's how you build great organizations.
You're actually going right to what I was going to say with on both of your comments, which I agree with both of your comments, but I would say that's secondary. Both of yours, except for the last thing you just said. I think if we don't have a certain amount as leaders, I'm saying we collectively as leaders, if we don't have a certain amount of trust with our teams, because we've developed a relationship with our teams, all the training in the world doesn't work. Creates more lawsuits, it creates all kinds of other stuff. And we, there's this, at least when I was trained in management, you and I are about the same age. You're the youngster here, right? So it was you don't get too friendly with your team. And you and I have talked about this on this, right? And I think that's BS because the whole person, we expect the whole person to show up. Then it's like, don't get too friendly with your team. Don't get to know too much about them. I think if we genuinely do that and then do the things you were talking about, it sticks. I think if we just do the things you were talking about without that genuine trust between the two, it's an exercise in futility. It's like, it's insanity, right? It doesn't work.
They were teaching us wrong because they did.
Yeah.
Distance yourself. But I learned, before I was in HR, I was a salesperson, and I learned from listening to cassette tapes in my car. I don't know to really date myself, but remember Zig Ziglar?
Oh, sure.
My favorite quote of all time. Zig Ziglar said, if they like you, they'll listen to you. When they trust you, they'll do business with you.
Yes.
If I go join an organization right now as their head of HR, organizationally, people are going to listen to me because they just have to, right? As soon as they start to trust me, they'll follow me. And now I can make a difference. And I'm going to go to what James started the discussion with. Somehow the future of work has to have mechanisms to build trust. Everyone's sitting at home in their bedroom office with a Zoom computer is not going to build trust. Everyone back in their office is not going to build trust. We have to now figure out mechanically, what is this going to look like? How are we going to build trust? What are those events going to look like? What mechanisms are we going to use to get people to know each other, trust each other, ebb and flow with each other?
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But before, the legal issue there is even if you have trust and it's sincere on both sides, eventually that employee may be fearful that they're going to get fired, and they're going to use whatever trust you've given them to their advantage. So what I mean by that, to give you an example, sometimes people will get too friendly.
Okay, we were trying to be positive about the trusting, James. Are you freaking kidding me?
So I think we all text emojis a little bit to our employees, and I think if you have the salivating tongue or a wink, it could be taken out of context. It could hurt you social media-wise, even though you didn't mean anything inappropriate about it at the time. So I think once you get to know your employee and how intimate the relationship is, you need to have a committee that needs to decide all employment actions, because you can be accused of favoring somebody or disfavoring somebody. We can no longer unilaterally say you're fired without other input. But how you build trust is what you just said. You let people know who you are beyond making you money. You let them see the whole you. They see, the family, they see what your hobbies, they see, sometimes you tell them some vulnerable things and build trust by sharing things that you wouldn't share with them unless you felt that trust and friendship, being a vulnerable leader.
Exactly. And be real, be yourself. I remember we had a big project, it was a layoff, and it was in a plant, and I had all my labor reps in there working, and they were killing it. There was nothing I could do to help them. Like, I couldn't just pick up they had to get through all these forms together. So I drove over to the party store and bought a bunch of Good Humor ice cream cones and brought them back. Partly because I wanted an ice cream cone, but partly because I appreciated what they were doing, right? That gave them authenticity into who I was. Like, now they felt like, hey, this guy cares. He's here. He's helping. He didn't leave. Like, that's a big, big, big deal. But let me ask you a question, James, because this is really hot now with the changes Apple's making. How do you feel about editable and deletable text messages from an employment perspective?
Well, I think a record retention policy is necessary with all this remote work, but I think that's very dangerous. And if you're at all aware of a potential lawsuit or a potential claim or anything, and you delete a text or edit a text, it's going to be a whole can of litigation.
Yeah, it's going to be a nightmare. Because I was thinking the same thing. Like, we're going to have to start having audit logs on text devices. Now we go back to that first discussion. Do I lock everything down, or do I open the internet up to people? Or
Well, what if people are using all their own personal devices?
There's all kinds of stuff.
I'm actually seeing an all-time high in people getting burner phones and texting their boss horrible things, reporting things, and anonymously, and then those get brought to me, and I don't see that trend stopping either.
Probably even going to get bigger.
It's going to get bigger.
I had a technician at Comcast who was trying to get his boss fired. So he would go onto the Comcast speak up line and submit as that person comments about that person's boss, and would do it in a way that it made it look like this person was being racist and being sexist and like expressing all these feelings. So that's been a common problem. How do you prove it? What are you going to try to check everyone's IP? It's a very difficult
That does
question.
raise on the future of work. We're mentioning getting to know the whole human. Political lines is a dangerous issue in conversation to have.
It's very.
Especially with recent cases that have come out and everything. I think that.
But it's right in your face all day long. That line gets blurred. So people are getting banged by it. It's on the TV, it's on their phones, and then it's natural to bring it into work.
To solve that, I think that the company is not just Steve or James. We have to have enough diversity so all employees feel comfortable. If they don't feel like there's anyone quasi like them, it's going to be harder for them to trust other people in the company.
That is true.
Very true.
Yeah. We're experiencing that across the board.
Yep.
No question. Go back for a second. One of the things that I read this morning was the upskilling of the team members, right? We talk about upskilling and leadership and the importance of that. And when you read the upskilling of the team members, one of the things that kept popping up, everything we're talking about is only a trend. It's our opinion. It's not. I don't think we can predict exactly what's going to happen for the future work. But when you think about the future work, it's this whole idea of critical thinking.
Yep.
Let's talk about that for a second. How do you view this issue that a lot of people are bringing up, that our current workforce doesn't have the skill, some call it soft skill, some call it hard skill, of critical thinking. And what do we do about that as a trend? Because it came up in 80% of the things that I read.
So I'm seeing more employers use AI and those assessments and those things to test like as a baseline of where somebody's at. And I think there historically hasn't been a great trainer to come in and say, James, they're low in these areas. Is there anybody that can come in and help improve them? And I think that's a hard resource to find still today.
The problem I have right now with the AI and machine learning applications in HR is that all of the models are still human written, right? So they're still flawed. The models are flawed. So until we get perfect models, if that's even possible, you're always going to have flawed or biased output of these models. And then I think about how talent acquisition, again, our world that we spend a lot of time in, has really leaned on AI and done a disservice to the function, because recruiters have lost that core skill of being able to go in, look at someone's resume, talk to that person, and then make an assessment and say, does this person have value? Will this person fit the organization? Does this person fit our culture? Do they have the mechanisms for success in my company? AI can't do that, but AI screens and filters, and we're losing that capability.
I'm going to take a completely different approach to this one, because I agree with both of you, but I think it's deeper.
Yep.
You may not agree, and I'm cool with that. You may not agree, and I'm cool with that. I mean, think about liberal arts degrees of years gone by. I'm not talking about a liberal arts degree now, but years gone by when you studied the philosophers, Nietzsche, whether you agreed with them or not, what was the point of it back then?
Get you thinking.
It was to get you to think, not to tell you what to think. And I think a lot of this critical thinking is because we're teaching even in some of the training I look at that we provide, it's teaching our teams, our leaders, exactly what to think, but not how to think on their own. And then you add AI and some of these other issues on top of that, I think it's causing a bigger issue. So I don't think this trend of upskilling in critical thinking is going to get solved overnight. I think it's going to be a trend that's going to be with us a long time, unfortunately. And I'm going to blame part of it, and this is where I'm going to get in a lot of trouble, on the overall educational system that is teaching our young kids how to think and not what to think and not how to think.
Yeah, the response to that is you're right, and I'm grateful that in law school, it's a completely different education system. They have the Socratic method where the professors only ask questions and get different points of view and different ways of thinking and want our critiques to evolve. They only teach you bad law and old law 500 years ago and slowly evolve it and see why things are changing critically and why people got it wrong back then. So I think that type of style, I see on a lot of your training, Steve, you ask the questions and get different points of view instead of just feed them what you think the answers are.
Yeah, but rote memorization as an education method, which is where I think we've landed. And I'm not an educational professional, so if someone wants to tell me why there's reasons for that, that's great. I'll listen. I go back to why do you vote for someone for office? You don't vote for someone for office because they agree with every single thing that you say or they say.
I hope not.
Hopefully what you do is you say, okay, this person's value system, this person's decision-making methodologies, this person's framework.
Their critical thinking is what you
critical thinking framework
believe in.
aligns with mine. So when they get to some question or decision, they're going to make it similar to how I'm going to make it. That's what I try to get my leaders to do in my organizations, is stop trying to be rote memorization. Don't give people a playbook and say, here, go do everything in this book. That doesn't work. That was the Ford Brown books. Like, that's the old philosophy. Give them a framework, show them the values of the organization, and hope that when they're in situations, they'll make decisions aligned with the values of the organization and move you forward.
So I got a text. I don't know who it's from because I don't know the number, but the question is playing off of your AI.
Tell that one guy to shut up.
It's actually playing off the side of AI and the technology advancements. Do we have a sense on where technology is going to go and how that's going to affect the future of work? And it's not an HR question, it's just kind of a general, broad question. Do we have any sense of where we think technology is going to go in general?
Well, we do know where technology is going to go. It's going to go faster, quicker, more automated.
Yeah.
And right now, I think the good thing about technology is it's an evolving process. So it's not a revolutionary process, it's an evolutionary process. It just happens at light speed. So there's so many iterations that things happen so fast. I know an individual who's building this recruiting engine that's going to change the whole way that recruiters interact with candidates. What he's done in the past year with this tool, it would have taken 5-10 years previously to do. So all these cycles get shortened, so things happen quicker. So you get version 1, you get a quick iteration, you get to version 2. The faster those happen, the faster things change and evolve. But technology is always going to be evolutionary. Can we say where evolution is headed? No, I don't think we can. I think it's going to ebb and flow along certain lines.
So I just attended my firm retreat, and our IT said other companies have had this big data now for 10, 20 years, and 99% of companies aren't doing enough with it. And there is a lot more you can do with this data to take advantage of that information and compete at a higher level and make resources better. Don't know where that's going to go, but something there. We have all this like DNA evidence for 30 years somewhere in the system, in the cloud. We got to figure out how to analyze that for tailored advice.
I think this one's a tough one because everybody's making these outrageous predictions about the way technology is going to change. It's going to, you're going to have robots at Burger King now, and that's fine. I mean, whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter. I think it's less about how it's going to change. I think it's more about preparing ourselves and our teams for change.
And adaptability or acceptability of change, right? The only thing that's not going to change is the fact that things are going to change. So change is going to continue to happen. The more adaptable or open to change you are, the better you're going to be.
But it raises a point. You're a CHRO. You should not be spending all your time doing payroll and health insurance and more basic tasks. So I think that could get more automated so you can focus your time on being a gig worker as a CHRO and not being there for 2,000 hours a year, because you're not doing CHRO stuff all 2,000 hours of your time.
I think you're spot on. I think that's been the robotics, technology argument for years and years and years. And again, I always go to this historical reference, but that's just who we are. But if I can automate the rote steps, then I have people doing the non-rote steps, which is what I want people doing. Right? So you have to trust that you have the right inversion level. That's my struggle right now, is I think people are going to try to get that to the wrong point. When I was, again, at Ford in the late 80s, early 90s, we were talking about automating employee discipline to where we wrote some software and some stuff into the HRS system where supervisor could go in, write down a few keywords. If the system saw those keywords, it would spit out a discipline. That's dangerous.
That's dangerous.
And we killed
that's stupid.
So we killed it, right? But the technology people want to do it because they believe it can be done.
And legally, you can't rely on technology beyond like 20%. Like there's case law that says you can't factor in, not interview or recruit someone based on your assessment.
There is a percentage attached to it, kind of from case law?
Yes. It's blatantly illegal. So you cannot rely 100% on any tech. So that's clear. And then two, I got two questions. One was, what is this black dot on my suit? It's just a little flower pin. So
I didn't even notice it.
Oh, does it stand for
came with
anything?
the suit.
Okay,
it
looks cool.
Came with the suit. Didn't take it off. And then second, the question for the panel is, are there any interview questions that need to change to help learn about if you're a strategic thinker or critical thinker or other things that we're seeing in the future work that change our style? And what are you seeing?
Well, if I can, I've gotten to two new interview questions that I love to use. The first one is, tell me your view of an X in an organization. So if I was interviewing you to be my general counsel, I say, James, tell me a little bit. What do you think a general counsel should do for an organization? So now I'm going to get your perspective on all of this. And then my follow-up question to it is, so what's your motivation when you're doing that for organizations? And I'm really just trying to get to what is your viewpoint of how you're going to do this job, and then what your motivation is going to be, what's going to drive you.
I like that. I like that. So I use a process called results-based interviewing. We started this a couple of years ago, but I think it's getting more steam because of some of the issues that we're talking about. So let's take all the way a step back. In order to do results-based interviewing, if you're the hiring leader, I've got to come to you and say, specifically, what do you want this person to complete? Like, what are the actual measurable results? Now, why is that important? Because generally speaking, we don't have that. Like as an attorney, you got to have X amount of billable dollars. It's really easy to figure out some of the key deliverables. But in so many jobs, it's not on a job description. It's not in the performance management system. So we've got to take a step back and say, here's what they've got to achieve. Then I like to go to the candidate and say, okay, James, What we need somebody to do is to increase sales by 20% within the next 13 months and a profit margin of this in the next 13 months. Give me an example where you've done something similar.
That's great.
Right, so I want to focus on the results. Now, James may say, well, I've not done exactly the same thing. Okay, I'm cool with that.
Yep.
Now I'm going to go into the situational side. Okay, given the circumstances we have, and here's the challenges in front of you, how would you approach it?
And that's how I coach people. I do a lot of coaching on people looking for jobs. If you get a question like that where you say, no, I've never done that, that's fine. It's a good answer. But then follow it up with, if you had hired me to do this, here's what I would do.
Here's the approach I would take.
Here's how I'm going to do it. Show your skills.
But I believe if we focus first on the results, going all the way back to understanding what the results need to be in a measurable format, ask questions against the results or something similar, and then ask the how would you approach it, it tells me, can they do it, how they think about it, what their process is, the critical thinking to think about it, and I think you get more information from the candidate at that particular point.
And I think what it forces you to get to, if I can take it one step further, I want to yes and this, as they taught us at Second City.
Yeah.
Because I think it's yes, but what that forces you to have is a meaningful succession plan. And I don't mean the succession plan being go have a spreadsheet that tells you who's where and what. Succession planning should start with understanding all of the roles that you need to run your organization. So you need a general counsel, you need a head of HR, you need a head of sales, you need a head of marketing. Okay, not just the title now.
What do they do?
What's that person gonna do?
Yeah.
Now you map all that out. You score them. This job is a critical 6 or 5 or 4. Then do your people separately. Who are your key performers? Who's at risk? Who needs development? Then you put those two maps on top of each other, and real quickly you're going to get your organizational health. Because you're going to have roles that you've decided are critical with people who are at risk in them. Or worse, you're going to have people that you've identified as key leaders in non-significant roles.
Yeah.
I have a different spin on the interview. Like, those are essential to learn the essential functions of the job and capabilities, but I think based on our conversation, the ability for trust and the ability to handle conflict are so important now that we need to ask additional questions that I think get both of those out.
Agreed.
And I think what I'm seeing on the conflict side, what helps me, I don't want to favor just athletes, but if someone played individual sports and team sports or an individual instrument and we're part of an orchestra, I think you'll learn how they can handle being alone and being successful, being on a team, being successful, maybe even competing against other teams and losing sometimes and overcoming that. I think those conversations need to happen, and I think maybe, say, have you ever disagreed with a leader or thought there was a better way to do something? Did you tell them, and how did you go about it?
I wouldn't even say if. I would say,
when.
Tell me about
Yes.
the time you disagreed with your leader. What did you do? Not how did you solve it, because we don't care. What we want is the honest
That's
answer,
right.
It's kind of going back to behavioral-based interviewing 101. Never add a tail. Don't say, here's the behavioral-based question, and how did you fix it?
Sure.
It's not valid when you actually
right.
do that. So I think you're actually absolutely the case. Even questions like, tell me about the not if, but tell me about that one person that you disagreed with right from the beginning. It wasn't even your boss. What happened? What was the outcome? Why did you choose to handle it that way? What was in
motivated
your
your
way?
approach?
Whatever. Yeah, I agree with that.
It doesn't have to be your boss because you have your Sunday best on at work. How about, what was the last time someone cut you off at a parking lot? How'd you react? Like, what's your human reaction to conflict or to stress? Because that's what we're really trying to get to. And a lot of people
I think people lie when you give them that much of a question. You almost have to go out to the restaurant and see how they interact with, with the staff.
But I think we can all be glad that, and I read this article earlier or late last week, the death of the famous Google, like how many golf balls would fit inside a 747.
Useless.
All those questions are dying
Yeah.
now, and even the big tech's not using them, and I think that's good. I think they were ridiculous. I think they were self-serving. They were some people trying to lord their intelligence over others and come up with some game. But I think that's good that that's gone.
Can we switch gears to one more that I got earlier, was texted on, and I mentioned it earlier, and that's probably what spurred it, is the trend of cancel culture in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And do we see that as a trend continuing? What are the implications of it, both from kind of the personal side, the HR side, as well as from what you're seeing on the legal side? And I know we've touched on this, James, you and I, in past videos, but it seems to be this trend that's continually coming up because it seems like it's rampant. At least that's the perspective that I'm hearing.
And it's such a sensitive issue that's got kids. You have to have kid gloves around it, right? So
Do you?
The cancel culture is in itself a cancel culture. So I think it's going to feed itself, and it's kind of self-feeding. This is where we defer a lot to James to give us legal opinion and legal position to stand on when people want to stop something. That's where I think the problem is going to be in society. So we're going to have leaders who want to do something differently, and they're afraid to do it.
So here's the challenge. One, in cancel culture specifically, the social media value and damages is more than legal. So we gotta factor that in. But two, to give you an example, you and I had a podcast where the general counsel allowed people to wear BLM pins, but couldn't wear LGBTQ or anything else.
Yeah, that's how much the world has changed.
And I said, well, why? Well, we have enough population there where we're at risk of losing people on a strike. We're not as worried. And I'm like, whoa, once you take a position, it gets pretty dangerous. Where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? I think it's clear that type of vision and that communication can't be at the HR or below level. It has to be the CEO has to be on board first of what the vision is for the company and what they want their policies to be. I think has to come from the top, otherwise it's not respected and could get lost in translation. I think that the honest answer is what Steve said. We can all agree to disagree, and my personal views aren't necessarily the same as yours, and that's what we welcome here to make us better and understand different viewpoints and different sides of an equation. But I think we got to balance the blend of bringing everything to work, and still certain things maybe should be separate from work.
And I think my coaching to CEOs has been, many times the CEO says, well, I'm just going to stay on the sidelines. Well, you can't. So the company has an opinion. And if you don't make an opinion, then people are going to fill that void with what their perception of your opinion is. So I don't think we can sit on the sideline. And again, over the weekend, there was some interesting news that came out, and you're looking at how companies responded and how quickly they responded and how well prepared they were. And I think that is great HR leadership. When you see how well prepared they were to respond to this, it just senses that someone's coaching that organization well to have an opinion.
So I'm going to take a little different
Let's hear it.
approach to it. I don't believe that, if I'm talking with CEO of my companies, that I should go out there and say, this is the position of my company. Because I believe my position is different. My personal views on some of the things going on should not be inferred upon rest of my team by saying this is the company position. That is my personal opinion. Because people may not, I guarantee you, somebody, no matter what your opinion is,
And that's fine.
somebody's not going to like it. So I do agree that somebody's going to fill the void, and they have filled the void, and my response is still the same. My opinion is mine. I welcome everybody, don't care who you are, where you come from, what your interests are, what you do, what your political stance is. I don't give two rips of anything. But I don't believe that. I take a different position. I don't think the CEO should come out and make it political like many CEOs have done. Personal.
I just think that works in an organization like yours where you know that you're making non-biased decisions. Like, you're a very responsible leader. Your companies are making non-biased, fair decisions. That's not always the case. And I think we start to get really big organizations, it gets fractured. You start to get these small pockets where you do have biases. And I think it gets to be very complicated to where the CEO can have an opinion, but the organization needs to have an opinion. And the voice of that opinion has to be the CEO or the board.
It's a touchy subject. Can I mention one other thing on this, and then we're going to be out of time, on this cancel culture thing, because I see it in a practical sense as well. We're talking about DE&I and all this other stuff, the Supreme Court cases and all. Let's take it to the day in and day out. Here's what I'm seeing, and I'd love to get your comments, and we're going to wrap up with this, is the cancel culture, I think, has become pervasive in day-to-day interaction in the office, meaning this, that leaders are more apt to just say, your ass is fired, and employees are more apt to say, because they got options right now, I'm out of here. Where I believe it used to be, let's figure out a way to work this thing out. Do you agree, disagree, and what do we do about it? Because I see that as a significant trend that's going under the radar of the big cancel culture things, but I think it's affecting the work every day.
Well, the first thought is the Elon Musk and what I see him doing, right? And I think that you learned after he started taking abrupt action without that interactive process, he actually wanted a reduction in force. So I think part of it is because of ulterior motives. And I think that if there was actually a need for all of those employees, employers should have much more of an interactive process, because you lose trust if you just are that decisive without understanding thoroughly, each side's perspective.
So just a little bit of a counter opinion on that. You could almost look at what Elon Musk did as great leadership. And here's why I'm going to say that. He leads the company with a certain philosophy. He's got a certain setup. He had an opinion, and he very clearly communicated his opinion, his position, and the ramification of it. To me, that's a good leader. No one in that organization could question what's going to happen if I don't report to work. So from agree or disagree with his opinion is one thing, but from a leadership perspective, just bringing it back to being a good leader, what he did was awesome. He made a broad communication, made his position very well known, and told people exactly, here's what you have to do to live up to this requirement, and here's what's going to happen if you don't. No one has any question. And it was fair, and it was even balanced. Like, to me, that's a great leader.
That's an interesting perspective. I like both sides of that. I hadn't thought about it. I'm just going to say this, is that I think both sides, and I'm saying sides, I shouldn't even say that. All groups, employers, employees, leaders, non-leaders, whatever I think we've got to stop looking at each other and just saying, I'm going to leave, and we got to start looking at each other and saying, how do we figure this thing out together?
Right.
And solve for some of the, I think that's one of the trends that we're not spending enough time talking about, because it's more popular to talk about some of the other ones, I guess, is maybe a way to look at it.
That's a great point.
Any closing comments, James, Eric?
Clearly, problem solving is the theme that we need to equip our employees with to be successful future employees.
And I just think I go back to the employee value proposition. You need to help people understand the value of working for your organization. You come work for me, and 5 years from now, here's what will have happened to you. It's more than just trading time for money.
Well, thank you both. We're at 12:03. Thank you for attending another Leadership in Legal, whether you're watching this live or you're going to see it later. This is our opportunity, your opportunity to engage, to get other people's opinions. We didn't agree on everything, which is absolutely the whole idea. If you've got thoughts, if you've got ideas, if you want to come on the show, please reach out. If you want to reach an expert in HR law, James Reed, phone number again?
734-649-1313.
And Eric, from the senior HR perspective, you're doing some consulting, some outsourcing and other stuff. How do they get a hold of you for all the HR stuff?
So the company is CHRO Solutions. We do a full service HR advisory work, fractional HR work. You can reach me on 248-207-1253.
And again, if you have thoughts about leadership and legal in the future, and August 27th.
Yes.
Okay, so here was the deal. I said last time that we're going to try to do this one in the man cave.
22nd.
August 22nd. David, thank you for that correction. August 22nd, if you're in southeastern Michigan, we're going to be doing a Leadership in Legal Live in Milford, Michigan at my man cave on my property that we've set up to do this.
And women are welcome.
Women are, this is not just for men. I'm using the person, that doesn't sound good. I'm calling it a man cave, but you're all welcome. But if you're here locally, it's going to be in the afternoon. We're going to do a Leadership in Legal Live. We're going to have more people there. And then we're going to do a cocktail. And if some people would like to have a cigar, that's going to be available as well. Well, more details will come out. I've got to have a count because I can't have hundreds of people in the backyard. But if we can get 20 or 30 of us, I think it'd be a great event.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Pleasure to be here.
See you guys next time. Thanks for joining Leadership in Legal Live.